Well, the House of Representatives last week called for the review or outright cancellation of latest China loans to Nigeria on the principle of force majeure. The House is also set to look into all extant China-Nigeria's loan agreements since 2000 with a view to ascertaining their viability, regularizing and renegotiating them. Now, China is at the fore of Africa's debt drive, making the Asian nation Africa's largest bilateral creditor, as it has given the continent loan worth about $152 billion in 18 years. That's between 2000 and 2018. To avoid unnecessary requests for debt write-offs, defaults, and reliefs, the Chinese government had limited its African loans to infrastructural projects executed by Chinese-owned companies and in most cases with Chinese labor. With such huge loan, a lot of critics are concerned over how feasible it will be for African nations to refund the credit with the advent of the coronavirus. An example is the Belt and Road Initiative. Joining me now to put all of these into perspective is a senior lecturer and the Director, Center for Infrastructure, Policy, Regulation and Advancement at the Lagos Business School, Dr. Bongo Adi. Good morning, Dr. Adi. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Chimeze. Thanks for having me.
So, our total external debt as at 2019, December, was $27.7 billion. Now, the Chinese component is about $3.2 billion. This is less than 10%. Is this really something to worry about?
Well, let's get the data clear first. I think as it stands now, our total debt should be about $31 billion. And if we add the new concessionary loans coming from IMF and other development finance institutions, we should be looking at anything about $36 billion. Now, regarding Chinese loans, I think the Chinese Exim Bank, since 2002, seems to have advanced a total of about $6.5 billion to Nigeria. So that's quite significant. So, well, if you say just 10% of our total debt, and then asking whether it is something for us to worry about, I think we have to look at the total debts, and our capacity to repay, because it's not just to China, but to all our various creditors. So when we look at it, the independent revenue, debt to independent revenue is about 95% as it stands now, 96% actually. So that has passed the critical threshold. What it means is that we lack the ability, we don't have the headroom anymore to repay, because our independent revenue is already being stretched, strangulated by the enormous debt that is hanging over the federal government as it stands now. So increasing that with Chinese loan, it's something that we really need to be concerned about. Why is that so? Because we have to look at the history of Chinese loan, not just in Nigeria, but in Africa, in the African continent, and in the entire developing world. That has come up in the past 3 years, starting from 2017 and 2018. I know that the United States has taken up China on this, writing to the U.S. representatives at a point, wrote to the president to actually, intervene in what they call Chinese debt trap, diplomacy. So they're using finance as a weapon in many developing countries. So out of 63 countries that has Chinese host the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative projects, about 20 of them had already gone under distress, and 8 were, about to lose their sovereign debt sustainability if they should take any further loan. So if that were to be a good guide, it means that we need to really be careful when we're engaging with the Chinese, borrowing from the Chinese.
Now, are you concerned that Nigeria can actually find itself in the same situation with perhaps Zambia, where the Chinese government had to, take over some government assets?
That is actually, if history were to be a guide, of course, all that we have right now is data. So we have to look at what has happened to other countries. It's not just Zambia. In Africa, we have Kenya. We have the Lamu port in Kenya that is about to fall into the Chinese hands. We know about their also Djibouti is a very small African country. Okay, more than 85% of their debt, exposure is to the Chinese, and we know that Djibouti occupies a very strategic anchor point in Africa in terms of shipping. So the Chinese, in order not to leave anybody in any doubt regarding their intentions, have established a military base there. So we have to put that into consideration. And then, of course, in Sri Lanka, we know what happened to the Hambantota International Airport. They had to be leased to the Chinese for 99 years when the government found themselves in default of Chinese increasing Chinese loan. They used to build that infrastructure. So we've seen this repeating cycle all over the world, where the Chinese will advance loans without asking questions, and then these nations not critically censoring or scrutinizing the Chinese intentions and all of that, kept on wrapping up those loans until they find themselves in default. And then what normally happens, the Chinese will begin to take possession, repossess strategic infrastructure assets. So that is what some people call Chinese, chopstick imperialism. So we've seen that, and then so many researchers are also covering that. We know about George Ayite, the Ghanaian who won the Lăwmãkers Prize in 2003 for his work. So he has actually looked extensively at Chinese engagement in Africa and in the rest of the world, and the experience is not just pleasant.
Okay, so what would you make of the move by the House of Representatives calling for a review or possibly debt relief? Now, going by what you have said and looking at the fact that the Chinese are, have developed this strategy of tying their loans to projects, how feasible will that now be?
Okay, that is a step. Again, you can see that resonates with what I've already said about China and their interest in key infrastructure or key strategic infrastructure assets in many emerging countries. So if they are tying their loans to projects, of course, that immediately leaves nobody in any doubt or leaves anybody in any doubt regarding their intention. So if you are not able to repay, they take possession of that infrastructure asset. So that becomes their collateral. So you can see that they have made it clear. So of course, I think, first of all, it is not bad to borrow. And moreover, the House, saying that we should declare force majeure and all of that in order to exonerate ourselves from repayment, we need to understand that COVID-19 is a temporary thing, whether we like it or not. No matter what, it will still come to pass someday. And then we'll find ourselves in a situation where we will need to borrow money. Okay, so if we act, based on this to declare force majeure and then default on our loan, so that wouldn't actually be a good thing to do looking at the future. So my thinking is that we have to introduce accountability, transparency, and responsibility in our engagement with the Chinese, especially when it comes to loan. We need the loans, definitely, but then we do not have the right institutional structures to guarantee that when those loans are taken, that they will be judiciously utilized and that we can repay them. But there are so many solutions to all of this, which I think we need to be looking at.
Now, so far, the Abuja-Kaduna Rail and a couple of others have been successful, but government appears to have suspended construction works on the Lagos-Ibadan standard gauge rail project for about 2 months now due to COVID-19. Now, what impact do you see this having on Nigeria's debt to China?
Well, when you say that the Abuja-Kaduna rail has been successful, it depends on how you want to qualify that success. Yes, success in the sense that it has been completed, executed, all right. But then when we look at the economics of that, questions have been asked. I know that I've heard the Minister for Transport in one forum, talking about how government subsidizes almost 60% of that. So now that, the cry all over is for government to remove subsidies. So do you think that that project will still be sustainable if those subsidies are removed? And if that were the case, should we be, will we be able to repay those debts that we use in those constructions? So what is the impact of all of this? We need to be careful. That's all I'm saying. Accountability, responsibility, transparency. But beyond that, before taking any loan, I think there are so many options. Even PPP, I wouldn't be talking about PPP because even the World Bank has beginning to change its stand on PPP. They're now talking about what they call blended finance. Blended finance is a strategic tool where you bring in development finance with some philanthropic funds in order to activate private capital into infrastructure development. I think there are some solutions that we need to be looking at so that we know that we are doing the right thing and not jeopardizing our sovereignty.
All right, Dr. Bongo, let's look at the Belt and Road Initiative. The hype around it, it seems to have subsided. What do you think is responsible?
Well, countries are still battling with COVID-19. So we need to get ourselves out of the health pandemic that we find the entire world has been thrown into before we can talk about other things. And moreover, why nobody's talking about it, Belt and Road Initiative, is not because people have, learned to live with it. It's just because even China is also under stress. I listened to the Chinese premier the other day during the World Health Assembly, making a speech because some people said he has been forced to actually address the world. So, and then characteristically of China, so he made another commitment of $2 billion to support, so throwing money at all these things. When China is being called out, they have this, practice of bringing out money. So I think they are now facing that challenge of responding to so many questions that I imagine emanating from different parts of the world on the COVID-19, its management, right from Wuhan in China. So I think at the end of the day, when we are through with this, people will still be asking questions about the Belt and Road Initiative. Like I said earlier, 63 of the countries, there are 63 countries now housing the Belt and Road Initiatives. 23 of them are in financial distress. They are no longer able to repay those debts. So if that were to be a guide, then you can see that the Belt and Road Initiative isn't actually to the interests of emerging economies.
Now, let's look at it critically. The total outlay for the Belt and Road Initiative was $1 trillion. Is this not ambitious?
Please come again.
The total outlay for the Belt and Road Initiative was $1 trillion. Is this not ambitious?
You mean ambitious from the side of the Chinese?
I mean, yeah, from both sides. I mean, that amount of money, investing it.
Yeah, so you need to understand what the Chinese intention is. So it's not just don't look at the size of the loan. You have to look at the intention behind the loan. So what is the Chinese strategic imperative? So they are looking at a new foreign policy. So we are looking at a world where China is beginning to emerge as a global power. So in the past, we've had a more or less unipolar world dominated by the Pax Americana. So the Chinese have seen themselves, as not an emerging country, but their GDP will, in the next few years, surpass that of the United States. It's the second largest economy in the world. And in terms of military power, they're also coming up, challenging the established order. So one of the ways, because you see, the Chinese became the manufacturing hub for the whole world. Okay, so and as a result, they needed to the logistics to bring in raw materials, to bring in inputs for their production, and also exporting, all the finished products. So they needed to protect those routes. So protection of routes. When you become an economic power, the next thing is that you have to become a political power. So it is important for them to protect those routes. So the $1 trillion of the Belt and Road Initiative is not just loans being given out to countries, but it is part of the Chinese strategy to, protect their dominance of the global economy right now.
Now, overall, what's your view on Nigeria's debt sustainability?
as I said, our debt is high. Independent government revenue available to service the loans runs at 96%. So, meaning that for every dollar, 96, for every naira, 96 kobo is used in their service. So what is left is nothing. So that is a very critical situation. It's a very precarious situation for any country to be in. So should we, because of that, stop borrowing money? Yes. There are, like I said, we have very smart people in Nigeria. We have very smart experts, even within government, who know how to structure good deals. Okay, so what is required is, like I keep saying, accountability, responsibility, transparency. We have to swerve away quickly from this whole thing about public funded infrastructure. So we do not need to, because government has displayed its incapacity and incompetence in managing projects and making them work and economically viable. So there are some other solutions that we need to explore. I've talked about the blended finance. There are so many strong structural systems, structural mechanisms that we could deploy to ensure that we get the loans in such a way that they are put into good projects that are able to repay the loans by themselves.
Right, accountability. That's where we will leave this conversation for now, Dr. Adi. Dr. Bongo Adi is the Director, Center for Infrastructure, Policy, Regulation and Advancement at the Lagos Business School. Thank you for your time, Dr. Adi.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll take a quick break. And when we come back, have you heard about the cannabis oil and its potentials? That's what we'll be talking about after the break. Just stay with us.